Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are now past the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and that means we're 100 days into DOGE. And the question is, what has been accomplished? So today, we are going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of DOGE. Plus, we're going to talk about what needs to happen next, all coming up on this episode of DOGE Watch. So let's get started with the good. DOGE has identified approximately $160 billion in spending that could be classified as fraud, waste, and abuse, and arguably just absurd. This includes department spending cuts such as $47.4 billion from the Department of Health and Human Services, a lot of that weird DEI programs and contracts. $45.2 billion from the Agency for International Development, USAID, which is where some of the most crazy spending took place. $6.6 billion from the Department of Defense, a lot more work to be done there. $2.6 billion from the Department of State, and much more. But let's get specific with respect to line items, and here are some of our favorite cuts from the last 100 days. $20 million cut for Sesame Street. Oh, that's sad. Until you realize it was Sesame Street in Iraq. Yeah. $1.5 million for a voter confidence summit in Liberia. $45 million in DEI scholarships for Burma. Yeah, Burma's a military junta right now. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. Yeah, I guess the Irish really, never mind. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $2 million for sex changes and LGBTQ activism in Guatemala. Hundreds of millions of dollars to fund, get this, irrigation canals, farming equipment, and even fertilizer used to support poppy cultivation, which is used for heroin in, wait for it, Afghanistan. That's right. Your tax dollars were still going to Afghanistan, so the Taliban could, yeah. But in addition to those line items, we've also seen a drastic reduction in the federal bureaucracy of approximately 200,000 federal employees, which came through firings, opt-out deals, and canceling of contracts. Specifics include Department of Health and Human Services with 20,000 jobs cut, including 5,200 probationary employees and 10,000 additional layoffs per NPR and Wikipedia. Department of Education, approximately 2,000 jobs, which is about half its workforce, as reported by Reuters. Department of Defense plans to cut 60,000 civilian employees, with 21,000 already taking voluntary resignations per Forbes. It looks like there's going to be about 7,000 jobs cut from the Social Security Administration. A lot of that will probably be covered by just, finally updating the way that they actually process records. The General Services Administration is going to have 1,000 employees fired, and the Internal Revenue Service is set to lose about 7,000 people thus far. And when we go to our friends over at Ground News, we find this headline. Democratic negotiators say Trump has targeted at least $430 billion in funding. Now, when we go over and we look at how the left is talking about this, they're characterizing this as an unprecedented, dangerous assault on essential programs, whereas articles on the right are focusing more on the Trump administration's perspective on why these sorts of cuts are necessary. Now, I can dive into the story further because Ground News provides me with multiple articles that have been published on this topic so far with links directly to the article. Now, remember, Ground News is both a website and an app that gathers related articles in one place so that you can compare headlines, helping you to understand not just what's happening, but who's telling the story and why. So, if like us, you are somewhat frustrated with the way that typical search engines curate the news where you only get one perspective, go over to ground.news/Doge and check out all of the different features they provide. In fact, if you go over there right now, ground.news/Doge, you can get 40% off their Vantage plan, bringing the price down to just $5 a month for unlimited access. This will give you access to all the features you need to keep track of everything that is going on both with DOGE and beyond. Now, let's get back to the story. It is clear that the press and Democrats believe that all of these cuts are very irresponsible, heartless, and counterproductive. And to be honest, I'm just having a hard time taking them seriously anymore because they don't seem to care that the federal government is not a jobs program. Every job created by the federal government comes at the cost of another job that could have been created in the private sector economy, providing goods and services that people actually want. And how do we know we want them? Because they can voluntarily choose to do business with those entities, unlike the tax dollars that get confiscated from them by their government. And this is the sort of thing we want. We want more of that instead of pushing things like trans operas in Colombia or DEI scholarships in Burma. When money is cut from the government, it doesn't just evaporate. It means it can actually be used somewhere else or preferably given back to the taxpayers. When a wasteful government job that should have never existed is cut, that means that there is now an opportunity for a job in the productive sector of the economy to be filled. Not to mention that whether you like these programs or you don't like them, we have been running trillion-dollar deficits. We are close to $37 trillion in debt. And bad news for our Democrat buddies, taxing billionaires isn't going to get us there, since if we flat out confiscated every asset from every billionaire in America, we'd only be able to pay for about 6 to 8 months of federal spending for 1 year. So please, no more crocodile tears over funds cut from wasteful government programs or government jobs that didn't do much except consume tax dollars. So that's the good. Now we're going to move on to the bad. Well, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that there are some reports that $160 billion is not a real number, that some of the contracts canceled had already been canceled or were never funded in the first place. Not to mention the fact that original DOGE projections were $2 trillion cut, then $1 trillion cut, and now we're looking at only about $160 billion in time for this next budget. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We wanted more, but I also think we need to be honest about something. As I've said in a previous episode, you're not going to find all the cuts we need in just fraud, waste, and abuse. We need to start cutting actual departments and agencies that should not exist at the federal level. So, DOGE still has a lot of work to do, but I'm remaining hopeful, because phase 2 needs to include not only waste, but identifying what efficiencies need to be achieved via personnel, processes, culture, and technology. And on top of that, we also need to find out what agencies and departments shouldn't exist, because as Elon Musk himself has said, we shouldn't be making more efficient that which shouldn't exist. I think DOGE is willing, but will Congress have the will? And that is where we get to the ugly. Where is Congress? I mean, no, seriously, because there was a huge fight about this, and Rand Paul and Thomas Massie warned us that if we pass the 2025 CR as it was, none of the cuts we wanted to see would actually start to happen. Now, we were all told that the reason why we had to pass Joe Biden's CR was so that we could deal with the wasteful spending identified by DOGE through a process called rescission bills. Now, why would rescission be better than debating over the CR? Because Democrats couldn't filibuster rescission bills. Fair enough. That sounds like a reasonable strategy. And maybe that is exactly what Trump wanted and needed to happen in order to continue working. Just get this 2025 CR out of the way and then let the Senate deal with the rescission bills. But where's the Senate? Who's carrying these bills? Why haven't we seen a bunch of rescission bills going forward in order to claw back these funds from spending that should have never existed? We also know that DOGE is just an advisory committee. All they can do is make recommendations. They can spot the bad spending, they can let us all know, and they can make recommendations. Now, the executive branch seems to be cooperating very well. In fact, they're being very proactive in working with DOGE. But it is Congress that is ultimately going to need to act. Now, I'll give props to Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. He gave us an honest answer. When we asked him what would we need to be looking for in order to make sure that Congress was doing his job, he told us all the appropriation bills must be through the House and the Senate before August in order to make the September deadline for the 2026 budgets. But that's the question. Are they going to make it? We don't know yet. So far, positive things are happening, but there's still a lot to be looking out for in order to make sure that we can make the deadlines. So look, there's a lot to be happy about, but here's the bottom line. Too many people who wanted to see change thought that all we had to do was get Trump elected. And that's not how our government works. Trump can and has done a lot with the executive branch. DOGE can and has done a lot in identifying wasteful spending and making recommendations for change. Congress, on the other hand, needs to get a move on. And those of us that want to see more need to make our voices heard. And let me give you an example of how that can be accomplished. In late 2024, X exploded with people furious at the prospect of a continuing resolution being passed by the House of Representatives that didn't address any of the frustrations expressed in the election results. We need that again, because a lack of action by Congress to carry the proper legislation to not only implement the cuts DOGE has identified, but to take the next step and begin to cut unnecessary federal departments and agencies is absolutely essential. Congress needs to be the one to adopt things like the REINS Act. We need legislation to dissolve things like the Department of Education once and for all. And we do have champions in Congress like Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee, congressmen like Chip Roy, Thomas Massie, and others. It's time that we support their efforts to carry the tough legislation so that everything DOGE has accomplished thus far is not lost. So let the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House know that this is what we voted for.